Hey, and welcome to Gaming for Tokens. I'm Marshall, and this is my first episode of my Intro to Unity tutorial series, where we'll be taking a look at how to set up a scene in Unity and basically hit the ground running with scripting and being able to use the editor that is Unity. So the first thing you'll see when you open up Unity is the Unity Project Wizard. This is the Project Wizard for 4.3, which is the version of Unity I will be using for this entire series, I hope, unless a new version randomly comes out. It usually starts you off on the Open Project pane, but I've gone ahead and switched over to the Create New Project, and I've also gone ahead and selected my location already. You just hit Browse and then select the folder you want to go to. This is the place where all of your files and all of your scenes and where your project files are going to live. Next is the import following packages pane, and these are effectively bundles of scripts and other assets and things that will help you do certain things. So the character controller.unity package is a bundle of scripts that will aid in the creation of character controllers. So for example, a lot of people use the Unity first-person character controller for prototyping and just getting into Unity. That would be in the character controllers package. The glass refraction and image effects are pro only, as you can see, and the glass refraction comes with a bunch of shaders and scripts to help with the refraction of glass shaders in Unity. So if you have like wavy glass, things like that. Image effects are things like screen space ambient occlusion or bloom, depth of field, that kind of thing. Stuff you put on a camera to make it look pretty. So that's kind of some examples of what these are. We won't be using any of them for this video. I don't think any of it's necessary. The next thing is this little 2D, 3D drop down. Unity by default was designed originally for 3D space games. So think a game like Skyrim or something like that probably couldn't be made in Unity, but that is a 3D game. A 2D game is something like your typical 2D side scroller, like Cannibalt or Mario or something like that. The new version of Unity 4.3 comes with a 3D or 2D choice because it comes packaged with a bunch of 2D stuff, which is actually really amazing, but at times can feel a little clunky because it's new. They haven't worked out all the kinks with it, I'm sure, and some things, in my opinion, are more complicated than they need to be or not complicated enough, but it's really fantastic that they even have an option like that now. They didn't used to. And once you're ready to go, just go ahead and hit Create. Okay, so once you have Unity open, this is what you should see. You should see your scene pane, your hierarchy, your project window or finder, and your inspector. Now, all of this can be pretty overwhelming if you've never used a 3D program or even a game engine or anything like this before. But try to let it not be. It's all pretty simple and it all has its purpose, and you can effectively ignore probably 90% of it most of the time. So to start with, this is the scene window. I'm going to start going over hotkeys and how to move things, and then we will branch out from there. We'll be able to create things and that sort of thing. So this thing right here is my camera. This is whenever you create a new scene in Unity, it creates an entirely blank scene with a camera, because in a game you need a camera. You need something. You need at least eyes to be able to see what the game is showing you. So to rotate around the scene is left click, so mouse left, and Alt. You hold Alt and you hold left click and you move the mouse around and you can see. Now the hand is panning. Panning is center click. So your scroll wheel, you click that in, and holding Alt, you can pan around. So that's pretty much how you're going to navigate the space. There's a bunch of other things, like Alt right click and moving the mouse up and down will zoom in and out. I've never really used that because I just use the scroll wheel. Scroll wheel in and out does the same thing. But you can if you want. Also, if you right click and you look around, holding right click puts you into a first person perspective, like most first person games, like first person shooters, and I mentioned Skyrim earlier, like Skyrim. So W moves you forward, S moves you back, A strafes left, and D strafes right. So you can kind of like look around at things while you move, which is fairly useful. So if we go over here and we go go over here into the middle of nowhereness, that is our void of game. Now I want to find the camera, but the camera's gone. So I want to click on camera, and then I want to hit F. F is for refocusing your focal target on the camera. So whenever you rotate around with Alt and left click again, that is where your camera will be stationed, or what you'll rotate around effectively. So if we pan, that focal point is respective to the camera, so it moves effectively. And now we're rotating around that spot instead of the camera. If we want to rotate around the camera again, we just select it, hit F, and now we're rotating around the camera again. So it's pretty straightforward. You'll basically be using F and Alt a lot to move around, and center click, but it'll basically become second nature after a little while of doing it. That's about all that I use, but there's also this view cube up here. So you click on things to view things from that angle. So this right here, I want to view things from the right, and I can rotate away from that if I want. Now if you're in the right view and you want to see things like a 2D game would be, because 3D games have perspective and they have a viewing angle and all that jazz. They have a field of view. But 2D games don't. You click this little cube here to toggle between orthographic or perspective camera types, kind of. So if I wanted to view something from the back in orthographic, I can, but this is perspective. So see how the grid changes it changes a lot. If you go into orthographic view, you can rotate around, and this will look something like like Civ, or like the original StarCraft, things like that. Well, I guess the new one too, probably. Those are built on orthographic perspectives. So this is orthographic, this is not. So that's basically what that does. Also, it'll tell you, it'll have a little readout if it's isometric or if it's perspective camera. So that's the view. That's the game view. The hierarchy, you may have noticed as I select things change over there. The hierarchy is a list of everything, all of the objects that are in your scene, and you can select them by clicking on the names, or clicking off the names deselects everything that you have selected. If there were multiple things, you can select multiple of them by shift clicking, just like you would in any file browser or anything, or control clicking, just like you would in any file browser. You can also delete things by hitting delete. And the way that I was making multiple objects there was I had an object selected, and Control D is duplicate. So I'm just duplicating my main camera a bunch. So I'm going to delete those. And that's the hierarchy. This is also a place where you can create new things, but we'll get there when we get there. You also may have noticed the inspector over here changes a lot when I have a thing selected. So this is the main camera of the scene, so it says main camera. It is tagged with main camera, and layer is default. Those we can ignore for now, I'll get there. The position of it on the XYZ is 0, 1, negative 10. So if we change this to 0, you'll see that the camera changes to be 0 on the X. And the way that we know that it was X, if you look up here, in every program you will have RGB for XYZ. So if you remember that RGB, XYZ, you'll always remember the colors of the arrows in 3D programs. I believe that's standard. It's kind of an unspoken or unwritten law in 3D programs. That is the thing. So it's the same deal up here, XYZ, XYZ. So if you change this, and by the way, if you click on the letter and drag left and right, you can raise and lower on the Y. And it's if you reset that to 0, then your camera's at the origin of the world, which is 0, 0, 0. And it's the same thing with the rotations. So the rotations along the x-axis, which is the red thing. So think about it like you're rolling the camera along that line. And it's the same thing with the Y. You're rolling it along that line. and you're rolling it along the Z, or the Z. So the scales are much the same. They don't do anything on cameras, so that's a bad example. But if we come over here to our hierarchy and the create, and we create a cube, then we can scale the X, scale the Y, and scale the Z. Now, that's a great way to do things, but there's a much more visual way to do things. So if we reset this to 1, 1, 1, and we maybe put this at 10, 0, 0, then that puts it at 10 on the X, and it's away from our camera so I can select it easy, because you can drag select in Unity. If I grab this, the hotkeys for selector tool, or well, I guess the panning tool is Q, which I never use. It's usually an accident if I hit Q. And W for move, E for rotation, and R for scale. So if I go to my move tool, I can move things along the different axes by clicking on the different arrows. But if I select one of these boxes in the middle, I can move things along that plane. So this is the YX plane. Think about the color on these as the only axis you can't move it along. So the red one will move it along all the axes but the X axis. So you're moving things along the Y and the Z. This is along the Z and the X. So that's why it's green. Green for Y. And this is, YX again. So that's fantastic. The additions of those little boxes was unbelievably handy. It didn't exist in earlier versions. So E, rotation. So it's much the same. You're rolling it along the X-axis. You're rolling it along the Z-axis. It's just visual manipulators. But there's this other outer circle for rotating it along the angle that you're looking at it. So if I'm looking at it here, I can rotate it this way based off of the way that I'm viewing the cube. So if I move over here, then I'm rotating it on a different axis. This is the screen space axis. So I don't know why you would ever use that unless you were in orthographic. So if we switch to the right view and then go to orthographic, then this is effectively just doing this on the x-axis. It's the exact same thing. But yeah. Also worth noting that these will change if we use global or local. So the global is in relation to the world. So this is the x-axis in the world. But local is the x-axis of the object. So if we rotate this, see how the x-axis changes? Because we're changing where the right side of the object is. So the right arrow always points to the right side of the object. So if we wanted to move something along, say we zero out the rotation here, and we wanted to move something that way, or rather at like a 45 or so, and we wanted to move it along a 45-degree angle, 45, then we can do that, and then we can move it along that 45-degree axis by using the local pivot. There's also center and pivot. We will get there when we have something that is not this thing. Or actually, I can just duplicate this, move it over, and then parent it by dragging it onto it. So now there's two objects selected when this is selected, and one object selected when this is selected, because this cube is a child of this cube. So if I select this, whenever you select something, it selects it and all of its children as well. So if I have both of these selected and I'm on center, my view, or my pivot point is here. It's in the middle of the two because it's the center of the bounding of the objects. So it just goes to the center of all of them. But if I change this to pivot, that'll go to wherever the object I have selected, wherever its personal pivot is, so I can move the other one in relation to it. I hope that makes some sort of sense. If you're not used to 3D programs, this is probably a sink or swim situation, and I apologize for that, but it's a 3D program. And it'll just take some getting used to for the program. I mean, it'll be tough, but that's, I hope, to make the situation smooth. So that is all of the different manipulators, and all of those can be seen up here. This is the pan tool, which again I never use. The move tool for moving things around. The rotate tool for rotating things. And the one I haven't talked about, the scale tool, which is much like the move tool. You just scale it. It doesn't have those little boxes, so you can't scale on 2 axes. I think, well, in Unity there's, or in Maya there's a way to do it, but in this there is not. So anyway, yeah, you can just scale along these different axes, and then this one right here is scale on all. Again, these are just manipulating the numbers here, and I suggest that if you're going to be doing scaling all, to eyeball it with this and then round off the numbers. Like this should be probably 3, 3, 3. Just to keep the numbers clean and nice. There's something that programmers and designers hate. It's unrounded numbers. But anyway, that is everything to do with the movement and the translation tools and the viewport manipulation. So I hope that helps there. Alright, so I've talked about the scene view and the hierarchy view and the inspector a bit, but I haven't mentioned anything about this weird box at the bottom, the project pane. The project pane is where you can look at all the files within your project. So any kind of assets and stuff that you've imported, like 3D models or code files or anything that you need to run your game. Because the hierarchy menu is stuff that's in your scene, but think about the assets kind of like your backpack, and the scene is what's in front of you. So you can store things in your backpack and put them into your scene, but they're not necessarily in your scene if they're in your backpack. If that makes any sense at all. So if we go ahead and create a new folder, we can name it stuff, then we now have a new folder in our assets called stuff. And if we're in stuff, we have this little node tree. We can go back to assets if we want, or this node path. And this will this says where we are. If we're in the folder, we can then create a new font, I guess. That's what it had me create. We can name this whatever we want. Font, and then we can create a new C# file and name this thing. And now we have these inside of our stuff folder in assets. So if we're in assets, we create a new folder. We can name it more stuff. Then inside of more stuff, again, we have this little node path to get back to where we are. There's nothing in more stuff. There's stuff in stuff. There's nothing in assets except for this folder called stuff. When you're in here, you can favorite things. I don't use this view very often, and I'll explain why in a minute. But you can favorite things, and then you can see them under here once they're favorited. But the reason why I don't use this, while we are in the assets view, we have no idea what is in stuff before we're already in the stuff folder. So we go into stuff, and now we can see what's in here. Some people like that. Some people like the lack of clutter, I guess. I am a huge fan of the original, like I said, which you can switch to by clicking this little arrow up here and going to 1 or 2 columns, because this is a tree of stuff. So as long as the folder is open, you can see what's in it, and you can see what's in more stuff if there's more stuff in stuff, for example. Beach ball. Okay, there we go. So if you don't want to see something, it's a choice that you can make to say, I don't care what's in this folder, I'm going to hide everything in it. But most of the time, you can see what's in things. I would like to see where all of my stuff is all the time. I would not like to see where the stuff that I'm currently looking at is, and I don't care about anything else. That's kind of a weird way to work. I prefer this view, and I'll be using this throughout the rest of the tutorials. You don't have to. You can use the other view if you want. It doesn't really make any difference. It's just a preference on, do you want to see everything or do you want to see what you're focusing on? I like to see everything. Some people like to see what they're focusing on. Also, I believe this is a mask of sorts. And you'll notice that all it's doing is manipulating the search function here. So if we hit this little X, we can clear that out. But if we want to see just our thing, C# file, then we can by typing in thing, or just TH for thing. So yeah, that's how that works. So you can type in names of things to see them. I don't think that you can, you can't type in types of stuff. It's just whatever the names are. So that's a kind of a search filter, which is pretty handy. And I believe you can tag stuff. No. These are searched by labels. I guess you can label things. I've never labeled anything, and I don't use the search functions very often because, like I said, I like to see everything. That's more handy, I guess, if you're using the 2-column layout, which I don't ever use because that'll show you everything, I think. Anyway, so that is the project window. The project window is kind of a strange thing, and you can select things and delete them, but a forewarning, if you delete something, it'll say, hey, you can't undo this because you're actually deleting the files from your computer. So if you do that, all of this stuff will end up in your recycle bin on your computer, and you can go restore it if you want. So that's what the project window is. Now there's also a couple other tabs you might see here, like the console and the game tab. The console tab is where errors and stuff from scripting will be printed out. So you'll see a bunch of text when we start doing scripting, you'll see it here, and I'll be using the console a lot. It's got a couple toggleable buttons up here for like clearing the messages and collapsing things, and clear on play, which is when you hit the play button up here, it'll clear that out. Error pause is if something in your code breaks, it'll pause the game, which is really handy because if you get something that like causes an error every frame, you won't get like a million error messages. You'll get one. You'll get the one that matters. And yeah, so that's the console. The console's it's necessary for making the game. It's absolutely handy because you need it. And the game view is whatever you're seeing through the main camera in your scene. So it's actually kind of sort of a combination of all the cameras in the scene, and I'll get to that in a later video. Cameras and camera layers are weird, but they're sometimes very, very, very handy. But the game view is what your game looks like through the cameras of your game. So that's what the game view is. And that, I believe, is all of the different tabs and things in this. You'll notice that there's a little lock icon up here. And what that means is if it's locked, you can't move it, because you can move these around just by clicking and dragging on them. And oh geez, I've really messed that up. So yeah, you can click and drag on things and move them around, and they snap to the different locations. I don't like this viewport at all, this view layout at all. And if you are the same, or you want to just do whatever I'm doing, then over here are the different types of layouts. So this is the default one. This is the factory settings one, which is what I don't usually use, and you can get to that by reverting to factory settings. So if we take the inspector and slam it down there for some reason, we can go, oh god, and then revert, and then yes. And then we get to this, which is the default settings for Unity. Or we can go by a 2x3 layout. 2x3 layouts are typically what I use, except I switched this to one column again. The reason why I like this layout is because I can see what's in the hierarchy, I can see what's in the project, and I can see what's in the inspector. I can also see the game, and I can also see the scene. So I can see everything at once. But because these three windows are typically in list form, it's handier to have them more vertically oriented than horizontally oriented, because lists are vertically oriented. So it makes sense that you would want it more length and width. And it's the same thing with this, because like all the stuff it can expand outward, and you'll see that happening. In later videos. Now, one thing that we're missing from this viewport layout is the console, the thing that I said was like necessary for game making, right? Well, if that ever happens to you, like it may happen if you decide to use the 2x3 layout, then you can go to Window and you can go to Console. There's also a hotkey to bring it up if you want, or if you have errors in your code, it'll just come up. it'll come up with a bunch of red messages saying, what are you doing? But you can also open up the console, and that brings it up its own little window, and if you take the little tab here and you drag it, it'll start to snap around like the inspector was earlier. I usually nestle it right next to the game window. The reason why, because like I said, if you have an error in your code, it'll pause your game and it'll bring up the console. So typically if I'm playing the game, if I'm playtesting whatever I'm doing, then I want the console to interrupt my gameplay and say, hey, something's wrong, because I need to know that something's wrong, because I'm making the game. If something isn't wrong, then I want it to just let me play the game. It's kind of my way of not ignoring problems. It's kind of like the in-your-face style thing. If you don't want it here, then you can put it wherever you want, like in the scene view. But usually I want to be able to see the console and the scene together. But if I'm fixing things from the console, I don't need to see the game. I hope that makes sense. So I leave it down here. Apparently my recording died, so that's exciting. What I was going to talk about next was these different drop-down menus and buttons and things at the top of the scene view. And game view and console and all that jazz. I already talked about the console one, I think. I think that made it in. But, so to demonstrate this, this controls the way that the scene is rendered. So right now it's in textured. By default it's in textured. It's usually where you want to keep it. But to demonstrate what it changes, I'll create a cube and change it to wireframe. So the wireframe view will render the different edges and the different edges of your geometry in your scene. So if you notice, we can't see through it, but we can see the grid through it, and we can probably see other because it's just the wireframe. But you'll notice down in it doesn't change the way that the objects actually are, because in the game view down here we can see that they're still cubes. They're still like not transparent. They're just rendered like this in this view. So that's what the wireframe is. Textured wire is a combination of the last two, so it's a combination of textured and wireframe. Render paths and light map resolution are advanced, and to explain those right now would probably be a bad idea. So I won't, but just know that they're there, and that if you ever need them for whatever reason, they're there. I might talk about them in a later video. Who knows? They're advanced. This is also kind of advanced. It's something that you shouldn't really care about for now. Leaving it on RGB will be plenty fine for what we're going to be doing. 2D, 3D, 2D, not 2D, is for if you're making a 2D game, this is one of those things that the project wizard will change for you. It'll make all your cameras by default 2D. It's basically making it isometric from the front, like with the view cube. So if we, sort of from the back. So if we did this would be the same as making it 2D. See how it doesn't change? Also, if you put it in 2D, you lose your ability to use the view cube, but if you turn that off, then you retain that. So that's what that does. And this triggers lighting in the scene. So if we create a light, that will automatically be checked. And if we delete the light, it will not automatically uncheck. So you have to make sure that if you don't have any lights in your scene, that is off, so you can see what you're doing. Otherwise, it's going to look like down here. Everything's going to be all gray and shadowed and crappy. See? All right. So next thing is audio on or off. It's by default off in the scene view. So what this means is that if you have an object in your game that makes sound, you will not hear it all the time when the game isn't running. That makes sense. But if you want to hear all the audio in your scene when the game is running, then you turn this on. Or I think maybe it's just the objects that are selected. Either way, I usually have it off because I can just listen to the sounds in the inspector. You'll see that if we cover sounds sometime soon. You'll see it eventually. So the next thing is different effects that you can have on or off. Those are off by default. You check it like a box, turn it on, you hit the little arrow to bring on what you want to be on. Checking that box turns everything on, I guess. These will likely hurt performance of Unity because it's going to be rendering the effects of the skybox, the fogs, the flares, and the animated materials all the time. So you probably don't want that on unless you're testing those things. Otherwise, keep it off is my suggestion. And gizmos are the various icons that you'll see in the viewport. So for example, this is a gizmo. This camera icon is a gizmo. And you'll notice that it obeys perspective. So it's, as I zoom out from it, it changes size relative to me. So that's the 3D gizmos checkbox. If you turn that off, see how it stays the same size, and then you can control the size of it somewhere. I don't remember where, but you can change the size of it. And this is also where the grid is, and if you have 3D gizmos, you can change the size of the gizmo there. And then all the rest of the stuff is just all the other gizmos in Unity. You can change if you want to see them or not with the checkbox, and this is their icon. So you can toggle whether you want their icon on or off, or whether, I guess, whether you want to see it or not, but that's not changing anything. That's bizarre. Sure. Anyway, you get the idea. And then this is a, I think I already talked about this, but this is the thing where you can, so if you have, create another cube, and create another cube, and we rename them. Cube 01 and Cube 02, and we just want to see Cube 01, we do Cube 01. And that will mask out our hierarchy and visually mask it out here. So this is Cube 1. Great. Which one's Cube 2? Cube 2 is that one. Perfect. So now we can see both of them. We know where both of them are. It's handy if if you have a lot of stuff in your scene and you want to find a specific object. It'll show it in the hierarchy. You can select it and then hit F to go to it like that. So like if we're over here doing stuff with cubes over here and we want to know where Cube 1 is, we can just, again, Cube 01, if I can type today. Go, oh, there it is. Great. Where is it? There. Perfect. And you know where it is. A little X to clear it out. And that's what those buttons do. The buttons down here in your game view are a little more, I don't know, they're a little weird. So like, these are the aspect ratios. So if you're making a game for a specific aspect ratio, you want to test the different aspect ratios, then you usually want to see this. So like if you're making a game for 16:9, you usually want to look at your game in 16:9 just so you know what the game is going to look like in the supported aspect ratio. This is the standalone. This is the whatever the settings of the build manager is using, which we'll get there. But this is what the game is going to actually look like. So the other thing is, this is what it'll look like in 16:9. This is what the game will actually look like. This right here is free aspect. This is just going to be whatever your viewport is, whatever the pane is. So there you go. 3:2, 5:4. These are all popular aspect ratios for different devices and things like that. So just look up the device that you're going to, or whatever. If you're on PC, usually 16:9 is a good bet, but you should also support a couple others like 16:10. But if you're going to like iPad or iPhone or Android or whatever, just look up whatever the resolutions of the common resolutions of those devices are and make sure you support them. And you can add your own down here. Like I have my own crazy 95:100 one, and you can edit them and you can delete them. Boop. And you can select those. So like if we wanted one that was like 1:4, not 10:4, 1 by, oh, I guess you have to do that. Well, let's do 10:40. That's the same thing. Then we can do that, and now this is 10 pixels by 40 pixels, I think, or 10:4. Weird. Anyway, so you can make your own aspect ratios, which is fine. And we can delete them, and we can go 16:9, and that's that. So maximize on plays. Whenever we hit the play button, it'll maximize the game. To demonstrate, hit the play button. Boop. There's the game in full screen. I unplay, and it goes back. And the same thing happens when I hit pause. It'll minimize the view. So that's handy. And the stats are what's going on during the game. So if I run the game right now, these things start to kind of tick a little bit. So this thing right here, the game's running at 75 frames a second, which is really good because there's nothing in the scene. We have one draw call because we have some cubes. So if we delete these cubes, we have 0 draw calls because we're not rendering anything. And our frame rate kind of starts going weird. It goes up to 80 sometimes, back down to 70, whatever. It doesn't really matter that as long as you stay above 30 or 40, you're fine for frame rates. And as long as it's consistent, if it's constantly fluctuating, then you have problems. But all of this is advanced stuff that like tech artists worry about. So you shouldn't worry yourself with it right now. Just notice that if this starts going below 30, that you're probably doing something wrong. And yeah, so how many tries, how many verts you have, all sorts of technical information for things you might want to know. And then gizmos in this again, you can toggle gizmos in your game view. So to make, that's the thing. So when you're playing the game, whatever you do doesn't stay the same. So if I delete everything in my scene while I'm running the game, I hit play again, it didn't actually delete any of it. It just temporarily deleted it while the game was running. That's kind of how the game works. That's how Unity works. So if you make adjustments to like variables on things, so if we change the like far near clip plane on the camera while we're running the game, for example, we change the near clip plane and then we hit on play, it goes back. So it's just a thing to know about Unity. But anyway, so if I duplicate the camera and I move that camera in front, and then I turn on Gizmos and I make this thing, there we go. So now I can see that there's a camera in front of this camera. And I can see the bounding boxes and all that stuff. I don't think I've ever actually used that. There's no real reason to. I mean, you have all the gizmos in here. And like I said, if you really, really needed to, you can just say, I want to go... Oh, oops. I want to go where it's seeing, and then you can see all the gizmos if you really, really needed to. So I don't know why that's there, but I guess it's there for convenience. I don't know. You can use it if you want. You don't have to if you don't want to. But that's basically what all the different buttons do. Yeah. I think that's just about everything in the view. Okay, so the last thing I want to cover is a quick going over all these menus up here. Nothing too in depth, just kind of what they do, what you can find there. So the file menu is how you manage your scenes. It's how you open up the build manager and how you run your project and things like that. We'll get there. We don't necessarily have to make a build yet, but I'll make a video on making a build in the future. This is also how you make new scenes and new projects. Right now, think of like a project as, well, this is our project. A project is a game, and a scene is a level of that game. So you can make a new project if you want, and you can save your scenes out and open different scenes and all that stuff. But you can also do most of that from the project menu or just using hotkeys. I don't usually ever go to the file thing unless I'm opening up the build settings right here. Edit, your typical edit menu for the most part. Undo, redo, cut, copy, paste, delete. For some reason it's labeled as shift delete. Delete works just fine, just without the shift. Undo, all these are your typical hotkeys, so like Control Z, Control C, Control V, Control X, Control F for finding stuff, Control A for select all. Like, they're all pretty typical stuff. The play, pause, step are the same buttons as up here. It's the exact same thing. So this is just another place to find them in the hotkeys for them. You can also save selections out, apparently. Well, I say apparently. You can save selections out. What this means is if you have an object selected, and then you go to edit selection, you can save a selection, and then it'll show up, like if you save selection 1, it'll show up under load selection 1, and you can use the hotkey or click the button, and it'll select all the objects that are under that selection. It's kind of weird and hard to explain, but that's how you do that. So if you have a really complicated scene and you have like all of your spawn points for your enemies, and you want to save those under the spawn point selection, you can. It's just a thing you can do. I mean, or you can be organized and keep them all organized in the hierarchy and find them that way, but it's whatever you want to do. There's also the project settings here. This is, it's kind of worth noting that if you ever open up something, like the input, it'll show up in the inspector. It's kind of weird because what you're doing is you're selecting the input file, I think, in the Unity structure, so then you're inspecting that input file over here on the right. So there's that. And there's all sorts of stuff like this. There's like the player settings and all sorts of stuff. Player settings is actually kind of deceptive. It's the graphic settings and the program settings. Program settings would be a much better, or well, game settings would be a much better description for that, or label for that, but it's there. There's also settings for physics and graphics and quality and all that stuff. There's the render settings, which again, you're selecting the render settings file and it comes up in the inspector. And this is like fog and things like that. So the kind of stuff that we see over here under effects, under this, are here. So there's the skybox and the fog and stuff is here. So network emulation and graphics emulation are making Unity try to use whatever you have selected. So currently the network emulation is whatever your network connection is. But if you wanted to see what your game functions as like a dial-up game, you could. And if you wanted to see the different shader models for graphic simulation, if you know what that is, then fantastic. If you don't, just ignore it. But you can see what your game looks like using different shader models. And snap settings brings up the snap settings window. So if you have a cube and you move it around, you create all these funky, like weird numbers like 5.0614134. That's a crappy number. It should just be 5. Why isn't it just 5? Well, because you moved it to that. So stop moving it to weird numbers, and it won't. Well, okay. So the way you stop moving it to weird numbers is you 5, 4, 8, and then you hold Control when you move it, and that will snap it to whatever these per axis snap constraints are. So like if we change this to 1, snap on the X will be much larger than snap on the Y. Well, it would be double because it is double. And rotation and scale will work the same. So if we change scale to 1, well, it already is 1, but I think by default it's like 0.1. But if we change it to 1, then what we get is if we hold Control, then we have a snap that bumps it to every 1 segment is what it'll do. And rotation is the same way. Rotation is right now set to 15 degrees, so every 15 degrees it'll click to 15 degrees. That way everything is set to a nice rounded number. And if you ever have stuff that isn't, like you move this here and move that here, you have all these weird numbers, you can hit snap all axes and it'll like round off your position coordinates. It doesn't work for rotation and scale as far as I noticed. Point in case. So we have all these weird numbers up here. Snap all axes only works on position. So it's worth noting that that's the case. These will do individual axes, rounding off the numbers, that is. So this is handy, and this is good to use. Get in the habit of using it because it'll save you some time in like organization and time, and like just having to deal with crappy numbers and programming and stuff sucks. So get used to using that. And that's that. And oh, there's preferences in here as well. So like in here you can change the color scheme of your Unity if you know you have Pro, and you can see what the hotkeys are, and you can look at stuff. But that's there. That's under Edit. And then Assets. This menu right here, the Create menu, is the exact same menu as this Create menu. So it's just a different place for it to be, I guess. And a lot of this stuff, actually, like the Show and Explore and Open and things like that, is also over here. This is actually, this menu is the same as this menu. So if you right-click in your project view, you get the Assets menu. This is where you create things like C# files and shader files and prefabs and materials and all sorts of stuff that there are better ways of creating than going through the Asset menu, honestly. So just go over here, create C#, whatever, or create C#, whatever. This Create menu is the same as this Create menu, and this menu is the Assets menu, basically. It's weird, but it's in 2 places, just so you don't have a hard time finding it. Oh, and this is also where you go to import packages people send you and export packages people send you. So if you have a bunch of stuff like thing and thing, thing 1 and thing 2, because you're doing programming on a project, a group project where a bunch of people are working on it, and you need to send all your code stuff over, it's much easier to just select all these things and export a package. And then when they get it, or if you got a package from someone, you could just import new package. Boop. And you get all of their stuff in the in whatever hierarchy they had. So if you're using an organized hierarchy and you're all using the same kind of hierarchy setup, which I'll talk about hierarchy setup when I do the setting up a scene video, which I think is going to be the next video. Then in theory everything will just fall into place and you won't have any fuss, you won't have any mess, and it'll be great. And it all is in one consolidated file. Instead of sending them a folder of all sorts of junk that they have to sort through, you can just give them a thing and they get all of your stuff, and it's all already set up, and it's all the prefabs that you need and everything. So that's the packages. Selecting dependencies will select things that are connected and need each other. So in other words, this cube isn't just a cube, it's technically, it uses a material. So if we export a prefab that uses materials, but we don't export the materials, then they'll get the prefab and it won't have any materials. And when something doesn't have a material, it looks like that. It turns bright pink. And that's a standard for most game engines and 3D programs, I think, too, sometimes. They'll be completely pink like this, and they won't obey like lighting or anything like that. They'll just be pink. So it's important that you, when you select things, that you make sure that you select the dependencies of the object to figure out what all it actually uses, and then make sure that you also export those things as well. Otherwise, people will be without things they need, and that would be bad. This is also a place where you can re-import everything. Again, you can do that all here. So if you re-import all, that will, or if you select an individual thing and re-import it, that just essentially reloads the file in Unity. Sometimes you need to do that if like Unity is behaving weird and like it didn't catch an update, because every time you leave the program and re-enter the program, it re-imports everything. But if it missed something somehow, or if it didn't catch you leaving or re-entering the program, you can re-import all. That's all it does. So components are a weird thing. That's what this menu is here. Component will let you... things have components on them. Like, I went over what an empty game object is. An empty game object is... Oh, wait, I didn't, did I? I'm getting ahead of myself. Game objects. Game objects, you can create an empty game object, and you can... An empty game object is just it's a thing. It's a thing that doesn't have anything attached to it. This is a game object. This is also a game object, but this is a game object that has things attached to it. Like it has a cube, mesh renderer, and a box collider, and a mesh renderer, which has a material. So game object doesn't have any of that. It just has the transform coordinates. That's all the game objects have is transform coordinates. But this one has a bunch of stuff attached to it to make it a cube. This one has a bunch of stuff attached to it to make it a camera. So the components menu is how you attach things. So we can add a mesh filter and a mesh renderer, just like the cube has a mesh renderer and a mesh filter. So we can attach those to it, just like this. Mesh filter. Mesh renderer. And now it has those things, and if we attach those cube material, then we have another cube. We've effectively just built a cube from nothing. Granted, this cube has more stuff, like a box collider, and we can add those things. Component, physics, box collider. So now we have the exact same thing, but in a different order. And to change that order, you just click on them, move down, and now they're exactly the same, aside from positional coordinates and rotation and scale coordinates. And that's how Unity works. Everything is a game object, but things have different pieces attached to them. Kind of like everything is a Lego, but a group of Legos is something else, if that makes sense. So this is a game object, and this is all the different parts of the game objects that you can attach to things. And if you'll notice here under scripts, these are the 3 scripts that we have over in our projects pane. They're just in a list form here. And that's kind of what that does. And if we hit this add button up at the top, it actually does the exact same thing as hitting this add component down here at the bottom, and it'll actually go over there. So if we do this, it says, oh, you're adding a component. If I do this, oh, you're adding a component. So here's all the components we can add. So mesh, the mesh filter. So it's like, it's the exact same thing as this menu. It's just in a different place. Window we've already looked at once to open up the console. It is... it's windows. All the different windows in Unity, you can open them up, like, and you put them wherever you want, I guess. It's not that complicated. It's in every 3D program. There's the Windows thing, and in a lot of programs there's the Windows thing, actually. And the different layouts and stuff are here as well. So you can change this way. Change that way. Help is pretty straightforward. Help is just help. You can... the most important thing here, I think, is actually the scripting reference. If you... are having problems with scripting, look at the scripting reference. When I first started a bunch of projects, didn't look at the scripting reference, and I kept running into problems and asking people questions, and they were always really dumb questions, and they were really, really simple little things that I could have just figured out on my own had I looked at the scripting reference, but I didn't really know that it existed, or I didn't think it was that helpful for whatever reason, because it was a manual. Why would I read a manual of something? Ugh. So I could have saved myself a lot of time and effort had I just looked at the scripting reference, but I didn't. And now I look there whenever I'm having issues first, and it will open up in browser if you click this thing. If you click this button, it'll open up in your browser, and it'll have a little search function, and you can look for anything scripting related, and it'll come up, and it's really, really helpful. It's really, really good. It's one of the best things Unity actually has. I think about it. But yeah, so that's all the different menus and all the different layout stuff. In the next video, I will be talking about how to set up a scene and go to town, adding things to things, and kind of that little bit that I did with the cube there, where I added a bunch of components together. But I'll be going over some of the other different components and things like that. And I think the video after that will be me using that stuff to encode to then do stuff. So I think it'll be a C# scripting tutorial. So one of those will be next. Thanks for watching, and bye-bye.